Hare Krishna, everyone, and thank you for coming today to hear Pradyumna's talk on the hierarchy of needs. I'm going to hand over to Pradyumna to lead us in the discussion today. If anyone has any questions or comments during the course of his talk, please feel free to type them in the box and we can make sure to pick them up or indicate to Pradyumna or any one of us that you'd like to ask a question. Pradyumna?
Yeah, or interrupt also. Yeah, here we are between friends, so feel free if you want to interrupt, just unmute yourself and you can ask or comment. But the idea is that at the end we have a good time to discuss about this, because the main purpose behind this presentation is try to put these ideas over the table, and hopefully we can have the views of all of you at the end. Okay, so let's start. Let's begin with this. So yeah, I'm gonna focus in this case on the hierarchies of needs. As I said, we can say it's a quite wide topic. So in a way, I will try to constrain some cases in which I think we can have a good picture of how to try to schematize this, and mainly show in a way a comparison, contrast between how these ideas have been tackled from different parts of the world and in different times. So let's start with this. Oh, sorry. So by now, I don't think there is any news, and I won't go deep into the fact that the recent times have been quite, important to make us think about what are our needs. And we are experiencing how those things are being shifting, or how some of them are being enhanced. Some of the things are become less important. So yeah, we've been living through this time. So that's no news that in periods where you have a lot of uncertainty, the way that you appreciate, the way that you consider, or the way that you look at the world changes in a way, because you start to question yourself, what's important, what is not. And in a way also question the default ways that you have of looking at the world and interacting with the world, or these mental maps that usually you have, these moments of crisis from one way or another. All these maps and all those plans start to be questioned. There's no news that's happening right now. And in particular, in this case, we can focus on one particular issue, that is health. And we can see how health, in a way, the view of what health means, in a way, is affecting all the different decisions that are being made across the world right now. So in a way, what is understood by health is affecting those decisions, as health as one of these particular objectives that we may have across our life. So for people, we can say in a more traditional way, they are considered health as something that is more punctual thing. So a damage to the body. So you have injuries, or I don't know, hits, people that is hurt. So damage that is in the body measurable, and the idea of health in a way is the opposite to disease. So disease is this state where your body is not working properly one way for one reason or another. So for example, you have a leg that is not working because you have an infection. So in a way, that's the state of disease, and the health comes to be try to recover, to cure that disease, to recover you to that state where you are not sick. But that's one way. So in this case, also traditionally, what we understood by health has been highly correlated with the body. The damage of the body, well, that means an injury, a disease. And that in a way, that's more from the physical perspective. But lately, we also have the fact that this idea of health has started to be extended more towards something more general than just purely the body. And now we have the idea of mental health and all these different ways that it's not like they didn't exist before, but now they have let's say a clinical characterization of depression and phobias and so on, so many other different mental manifestations that before, because they were not in the body, they were not properly characterized as a disease. And now the clinical science, in a way, is enhancing the cover that it has as a topic, and covering even more things. Or in a way, to be healthy means more than just to have a healthy body, but actually a healthy mind too. So we can see basically how the definition of health is shifting. And certainly this definition, and also the possibilities that technological advances and understanding of science allows, also makes that shift to what is expected by health. Okay, so in a way we can say that what we have currently is this transition from health as a state to health as a continuous thing, as a dynamic thing. It's not just one punctual thing, but actually it's a continuous process in which you do certain things to be healthy. This idea of well-being that is intimately linked to how health is understood today. The fact that it's not like you just go to the doctor when you're sick, but actually you want to do things to keep that state where you are healthy. And health in a way also is intimately linked to what the expectations that you have as an individual in the society is. So before, let's say, we take, I don't know, miners in the 18th century, the expectations of health for them is dramatically different from what we understand today in the 21st century as health, and what is well-being for us, what we expect to be able to do with our body and with our mind. And also, you can say that also works the other way, what society expects from you to act as a healthy member of the society. So there is a lot of things that I start to shift, in a way, just giving a more global, not so focalized, but more global understanding of what health means. But in the end, health comes to be this balance of things that are being required to keep this equilibrium within the body or within the mind or within the self or within the society and so on. And now you have the idea of health as a global thing. And climate change and all the environmental movement in a way is just characterizing that same, we can say that same origin in a different, more extended way. But what we have actually, you don't have to make it something modern, but especially today, we have so many things because in a way we are aware of so many things that are coming to play a role in how we keep this balance. So there's many expectations, social expectations, environmental expectations, as we were talking, and so on. You can start to derive and separate all these different expectations. And obviously that will affect the way that we understand how we should keep this balance. The ways of, like in the same way, the ways of life are changing, and in a way are changing depending on these expectations of what is expected of a good life, of a healthy life. What should I be able to do because I'm healthy, and so on. So as we were saying, there we have all these influences that are just in a way moving around this boat, but in the end, health, we can understand it as keeping a balance. In a way, understanding the individual, understanding the position of this individual and the rest of with the rest of the interactions that they have. But in the end, it's this idea of just keeping an equilibrium. And importantly, to keep an equilibrium, some action is performed. So in a way, the behavior is motivated by this desire to keep this balance. So in this way, in the same way that the guy in the tightrope has to, it doesn't look like, but actually is having an action and a movement in the same way that you're balancing your body in the same way that when you're riding a bike. You are actually doing something even if you don't realize. Still, there's internally something that you are doing to keep that balance. So that's the thing. So we can take health, but also in more general, like all these different things that you do to keep an equilibrium. So that there's different motivators, that the different goals that we have in this world. And as we were saying, there's so many goals, so many things that appear. Like we don't know where how can we schematize, how can we understand all this variety of goals that are offering before us. We have so many different things that we can do. And then eventually how we decide which is the order, how you can schematize these different influences in a way that makes sense when you try to understand how the individual operates in the world. So in a way, that's basically the motivation that, as being, you can observe its motivation across history, but in particular in a recent history, an American psychologist, we tried to propose a theory, he tried to schematize and give a certain order to these different influences. So in a way, this psychologist, Abraham Maslow, he started to develop this theory around the mid last century. And this is the name of his initial paper where he started to propose these ideas, but eventually it was something that started to grow and develop for the rest of the century. But also one of his motivations, in a way, to try to characterize and present this schema of ideas of the possible motivations that one may have, was that first, that until that moment within the empirical sciences, this idea to describe motivation was mainly based on things that you can see, and mainly based in behaviors that are controllable and measurable, mostly in animals. So that's the whole school of the behavioralism, that basically you have some classical experiments in which you have, I don't know, like dogs that are exposed to food, and the dogs start to salivate, and you start to, in a way, control for the different behaviors that these animals are having product of different stimuli and different things that they have to, they're exposed to. So Maslow was saying, okay, that's good, animals, but in a way, humans are a bit more complex than that, or we understand that we are more complex than that. So how can we schematize maybe more higher motivators for humans' behaviors? And the other let's say, current that was trying to deal with that same issue was the psychoanalysis. Freud was trying to do that, also try to decipher the hidden motives behind the actions and the behaviors of people. But in that case also, he was being inspired mostly by people that already had some psychological issues. So in that sense, it was motivated by, let's say, activities and behaviors, but it was in a condition of a, we can say, diseased mind, not in the general population. So Maslow, what he was trying to do in this case, okay, let's try to characterize these goals or these motivations, but in a general population, not just the people, not just in simple animals, not just in people that it has these psychiatric conditions. So he proposes the different categories. So he proposes these people usually represent them as a pyramid, but in his case, he didn't present it directly like that, but the pyramid is giving the idea that, in a way, to a certain level, the inferior needs have to be fulfilled in a way that you have ability to dedicate resources to the other needs. So he started with the physiological needs, like if you are hungry, you need food, but later starts to elaborate for safety, this love and belonging or affection, the esteem, and finally you have this self-actualization. So what he's referring specifically with these particular needs. So the first one is the psychological needs that basically we can refer mostly to this functioning of the body. If you are hungry, you're gonna get food. And for someone who is hungry, for example, in the middle of the desert or in a very isolated place, if you show a table full of food, that's basically the utopia for that guy. Like that's just the best in the world that can exist, having food when you're really, really hungry. That's the best thing that you can think of. So in a way, that's the satisfaction that you're looking for. So in that sense, like if you're hungry, you need to eat. If you're cold, you need to get some warmth, and so on. So all the needs related to what's called in biology like the homeostasis, that it means the keeping the body or keeping the different functions in the body in a certain balance in a way that life can continue. So he's putting in this category all these needs. But later comes the idea of safety. So once you are, I don't know, once you are hungry, you are not hungry anymore once you have food. Probably the thing that you will think is that, okay, what can I do to avoid being hungry again in the future? So in a way, is this starting to think towards the future in a way, getting away from the present, the immediate present, where we are suffering from hunger, from fear, from thirst, and so on, and thinking, okay, if the present moment we are relatively okay, then we can think how we can escape from that suffering of the present moment. So in this case, safety starts to rise, and you start to try to look for ways of having a more, I don't know, a better financial position, so you don't have to be dealing with this scarcity of food. And actually, he started to propose that even things like, for example, the fact that we have a city is built up in a way to protect the human being from the wilderness, where there's so many different things that can attack you and affect your integrity. So in a way, the city is built up based on this principle to have a place where everything is predictable, everything is expected, and you know when the train is going to come, and you know where in the supermarket you have food, and so on. So in a city, in a way, civilization in that sense, this comes to be as a development of that need of safety. And actually, he proposed that from a basic perspective, an elemental perspective, we can say science also comes to fulfill that same need. That in a way, because you know the world better, you will be less threatened about all the different phenomena that can arise. Like, let's say the thunder start to be threatening because you know that the thunder is something that happens when you have clouds in a particular disposition and you have particular humidity in the air and so on, because you can predict it better, so it's less threatening. It's safer world when you know it in a way. So these are the next level, we can say, that Maslow is proposing. After that, you have affection. So the idea is that once your immediate needs, like hunger, and in a way you have a certain level of safety, you start to look for, okay, now we can have a society. Now I want to belong to that society. Now I want to be able to relate with other people because I'm not basically dealing with these immediate individual urges, and I can deal with other individuals. I can start to build up. I can, in this case, he says it's the idea of that you can give love, you can receive love. And here, in this case, to make this difference between, or this contrast between safety and affection, he also, in his paper, in the original paper, he also refers to these cases of children. That he proposes that the children have this need to have a safe environment, a predictable and habitual environment where they can grow up and without so many surprises, without so many things that are going to come and disrupt. And he poses the case in which many kids, that even when the parents are not that affectionate, because those parents are giving them this stability in a way, they get very attached to them. So in this case, he's proposing this idea that, again, the idea that one need has to be fulfilled to a certain level after you go and look for the other one. But in this case, affection, it comes to be that, like, the idea of belonging to a society, of being part of something more beyond, in this case, your own the bodily individuality, we can say. But once you have this affection from the affection perspective, you are relatively safe. You also want to thrive within that society. You don't just want to be one more within the society, but actually you want to be esteemed within the society. You want to have a certain position. So you want to have a high idea of yourself. You want to think, I'm a good person in the society, I'm a good person. And also you want others to think that you're a good person too. So you basically, that whole, we can say, social gain starts to arise as in this case, and the next level in these needs. And finally, what he describes in this case as this level of self-actualization. Well, he mentions that it was a bit difficult to characterize what happened in this stage because, in his opinion, there was not a lot of people that was at that stage of self-actualization. Most of the people was acting under the other goals. But in this case, self-actualizations will be referring to a person that it has relatively covered the other needs. We'll try to look for, okay, what's the most, what's can be the most higher expression of my potential, like a person who's trying to explore the higher possibilities of their being. So try to identify what's the deeper self of them. So, for example, in this case, he mentioned how these people that act in a more playful, creative way, that try, for example, a musician that is from this equilibrium, from this perspective, will try to make music because that's the thing that defines himself in the deeper sense. He has to create music from that perspective. So, and what Maslow was proposing is that this action, the kind of understanding themselves individually to the highest level, allows them to be the happiest. So that for Maslow is this ultimate happiness, understanding themselves to the highest degree, the whole potential. So in this case, he points that more in the direction of the artist, but also he says that not necessarily has to be, but that's the way that it's easier in a way to appreciate that. that is spirit. So in a way, we can say that these people is less controlled by those needs, because in a way, if you have a relatively safe position within the society, you can manage, you can afford to be disruptive within the society in a way. And also he proposes that this understanding of science and philosophy in this highest sense can come as a way of understanding who you really are. So that's more than just being safe, but actually understanding in that more elemental, deep level, what's really the being, or who is this person who's trying to develop that maximum capacity. Okay. So basically, that's are the different levels. It is a very broad view, but basically, as a summary, the idea that Maslow is proposing is that you have different needs, different levels of needs, and the behaviors of people, the actions, the decisions, will be informed by these needs, will be affected by unsatisfied needs. Particularly, these needs are not crudely, not like you have to be 100% fulfilling one to take the other, but to a certain degree, you have to be fulfilled to a certain degree in the inferior levels to be able to undertake the higher goals. And you can see here the distinction between the lower levels and the higher levels is basically that at the higher levels are more associated with this idea of individuality, of this humanness, as he proposes, or also with the psychological health. And the other are more related with the bodily needs. Okay. So this is basically the big overview of Maslow's ideas. Now, I would like now to take you to some thousands of years back, because obviously this is the idea and the understanding the individual as a being that has needs. Obviously, it's not the very first time that someone had to try to tackle that issue. And we can go back, actually, back thousands of years to India and try to check some other texts, some other sources of information related to this, as are the Upanishads. So in the big Vedic tradition, there is a lot of different topics that are described in the Vedic, within the Vedic tradition. But the Upanishads in particular are dealing with this more, we can say, philosophical or more with knowledge a bit more, try to understand again the being, or what's the position of the being, or what's called ontological, from more that perspective than a purely, we can say, a ritual or some other aspects. So Upanishads, we can say, are dealing mostly with that type of knowledge. And in particular, in one of the Upanishads, in this Taittiriya Upanishad, it describes another model of hierarchical organization of, 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 of actions, we can say, of consciousness, better said. That is this idea of cautious. Cautious means the cover, the sheath, that is in a way covering this pure consciousness that is expressed in the Upanishad as this basic elemental feature, this conscious being, this fundamental agent that is the one who interacts in the world. But there's different layers, different covers that in the end makes that this consciousness will act following different levels, different ideas. So I will read this short paragraph that is coming from the Bhagavad-gita As It Is, where is described briefly this idea of consciousness. So as it is stated in the Taittiriya Upanishad, Brahma Pusham Pratishta, there is a manifestation of the Supreme Lord energy known as Annamaya, dependence upon food for existence. So that's we can say the first of the basic level. This is a materialistic realization of the Supreme. This is then in Pranamaya, after realizing the Supreme Absolute Truth in food, one can realize the Absolute Truth in the living symptoms or life forms. In Jnanamaya, realizations extend beyond the living symptoms to the point of thinking, feeling, and willing. Then there is Brahman realization called Vijnanamaya, in which the living entity's mind and life symptoms are distinguished from the living entity himself. And the next and supreme stage is Anandamaya, realization of the all blissful nature. Okay, so this is like a big overview, but what I actually trying to characterize in this thing, and I think that in a way first thing that strikes me is the similarity in a way to the different levels that Maslow, we can say from other perspective, is also proposing, that the basic level in how this consciousness will interact will be interacting at the level of the food. And what is food? Well, basically food is what's sustaining the body. So you can think of a little baby, just newborn, that basically his whole day goes around to having the food to be able to survive. And that's a universe for him. That's all what he thinks. So, in a way, at that basic level, if we think of these, the needs that are being manifested, needs as this motivator for the actions that this entity will start to follow, the initial motivation, as is proposed in this model, in the model of the koshas, the initial motivator is to keep the body in a way, because that's what you keep to obtain through the food, keep the body working. And that we can say you have that immediate perspective in the present. Okay, if I get the food now, everything is going to be all right. Okay, so that's from the first perspective, like at that anamaya level. If you get the food is the absolute thing. Having that food, that thing that is sustaining your body, that's the absolute thing. And all your action, all your activities, or your consciousness, we can say, is going around that idea and trying to find that type of satisfaction. But the second level that is described in this model is the one that you achieve through pranamaya. What means prana? Prana means this living force, as also the living air, but basically it's the idea that there is a living entity, a living force within the body. So it's not that you get the food and everything is going to be all right, but actually you start to realize that there is certain equilibrium within your body that is making that food is digested, and the energy eventually is being devoted to the different parts of the body, and the body works in that equilibrium, that living equilibrium, that you realize that, okay, the food is there, but I'm actually alive. I'm aware of my own existence. So the kid realizes, okay, it's not just the food, there are some other things. There's that sense of security, that need of security arises there, because you realize, okay, I'm existing now. I want to keep existing. I want to be defended against the annihilation. So you want to keep that living balance, that living energy flowing. And also you start to realize that other beings are also living. You start to realize it's not just you, it's all the things that are living around you. So that's the consciousness that you get at that level, this consciousness of being alive, and that's pranamaya. But the next level is what is described as the level of the mind, of manamaya. That is basically what happens there. Is, okay, you exist, and now you realize that also at this more than the pure bodily perspective, you also have thoughts, and you can think things, you can imagine things, you can feel things, you can desire things. And all those things in a way are operating in a level that is different from the pure body. So you realize that, and you start to expand those things. So you start to create, you start to elaborate on that. You start to rise and then build up things and cities and stuff, trying to follow those desires, those wishes, those ideas that start to rise in your mind. See, yeah? So that's basically the next level. So you start to operate in this purely bodily sense, but it's you're tackling, we can say, subtle problems that are more subtle. So in this way, we're describing, and maybe overlapping also some of the previous description that we have from Maslow's. This idea that you have these primary things that are related with the body, that we can say that this idea, there's economic development, and societies are organized following that idea, that we have to develop in a way that we have enough food, let's say, and you are able to satisfy that need, or you act according to that consciousness. From the pranamaya, you have that this idea that there is defense. Okay, we have enough economic development, but also you want to have that safety, and that safety is expressed as, I don't know, countries against those other countries, people against other people, you against the environment, the nature, all those different forces that appear as something that is threatening for your own existence, and that's the other level. And the society, we can see how it's organized following those principles. And the other is the mind. We can think things, we can create things, we can have philosophical systems, we can have mental and different types of science, different types of theories, different types of ideas, and try to organize our world following those ideas, try to create an art, try to create so many things that are just not purely there, but actually looks like they're coming out of our pure mind, our own imagination. So in a way, we can see how different parts of the society are organized, and our lives too are organized to try to fulfill those needs. But in this model, there's some other layers that are also proposed. And those are, as we were describing here, we can say deeper than the Manomaya, we have the Vijnana Maya. And what means Vijnana? Well, that's also characterized as this understanding that that is made of understanding. So what means that? Well, one of the things that you start to realize when you live with yourself for a while is that, yeah, I have thoughts, I have ideas, but I'm not necessarily forced to do all what my mind tells me to do. You start to realize that in a way you can dissociate from that understanding. It's not like you just follow what the mind tells you to do, but actually you can have that appreciation that the mind, in a way, is something that is always flowing, and you can look at it as you will observe, I don't know, as you will read a book. You take the book, you can read it, and in a way, from a detached way, you can experience it. So in this case, from that perspective, what is proposed here, actually you can start to realize that even when this mind, and obviously even when the body look like are something so intimate to you, you still can generate a separation. Those are your things, but I'm not them. So now, even with body, you see there are so many things in the body that you can change parts of the body. There's so many flexibility with different operations you can do that. Actually, yeah, you can realize that you're not necessarily entitled and completely bounded to this body. There are so many things that you can do. And what is proposed here, even that you can do that from the mental perspective too. Even with your experience of all those things, you also can detach from that. So the understanding over there that is basically the consciousness is just in a way being bounded, being constrained, and is dealing with these different layers, but the consciousness in the last word is not that layer, it's not that covering. So can separate that, and in the way, this pure consciousness can be expressed. And what means that pure consciousness, and that's the platform of Anandamaya. So Ananda means happiness. So we can also comes to mind the idea of what was the highest level for Maslow, this idea that in the end, the being will try to satisfy this happiness, internal happiness of understanding who he is. But Maslow was proposing this from the perspective of what he can do with given their own circumstances. This person, each one will try to understand their own potentialities. And in this case, we can say that Ananda is also appealing to that same idea, because it's in a way is realizing that possibility that there is happiness, and the highest level you have this happiness that actually is some experience. So to have an experience, you need to have someone who is experiencing that. So you can say that in this case, you are going to deeper individual root of the whole motivation for consciousness. That is this individual looking for this happiness of the person, the final person who is behind all those layers of those covers. And in a way, also you can refer to this just to complement that point. Is just you can refer to the Vedanta Sutra, that is another important text in the Vedic tradition, and this is mentioned this Anandamaya Vyasat, that this beings, this consciousness in the end is made of happiness. So that's the fundamental root of all need, we can say, from this perspective. That's the fundamental substrate of the being. And in the end, the going through those different layers, the idea of this, and that's again the perspective from the Vedic perspective, this yogic process, the yoga process, in the end, is trying to make you, help you understand those different levels. So we started with necessity. We started with necessity at the beginning, and you have necessity in the basic levels related to the body. But now we are reaching this highest level, and still you have necessity. Necessity is still present, because we can say that necessity is intimately linked to what is understood by being, by consciousness. The consciousness needs things, needs different, because it has different desires. That's consciousness, and then we can say that's one way of separating what's conscious from what is not. The conscious things have needs, and the unconscious things don't have needs. So from this perspective, to the highest level, this anandamaya comes to be to try to satisfy the highest, deeper need, in this case, coming from the understanding of which is the basic constitution of this conscious agent, of this conscious being. And also we can consider this as an expansion of the world, going back to the idea of science. The idea, this as Maslow was proposing, is the initial understanding of science as something that is helping you to keep your safe position. So you have this little circle around you that is you're safe and protected. But eventually, the more you are trying to go forward in that path, you start to make that circle bigger. You try to cover more things because you're trying to understand self in a deeper level, in a more global way. So in this case, also you can observe that same movement, that from that initial consciousness, that everything that is important is the food, and that's it, because that helps me to be maintained and to be satisfied. Eventually, you start to increase the circle, and you start to cover more things, more things, more things, and eventually, you can say that at the highest level, you're trying to understand what's your position in relation with the whole universe, with the wholeness. What's your role within the biggest picture, we can say. So in that sense, science comes to be manifested in that higher level that is trying to understand your position in the whole, not in just that part that is convenient for you to feel safer for a period of time, but actually help to understand to the highest level. And also in a way, going back to the idea that to satisfy a need comes also together with the idea of to be feeling safe also, but feeling this peace, this satisfaction, that need is satisfied. Satisfaction being satisfied. That idea that something is calm, something is okay, something is in a way at home. So also, basically in this case, as is described, the idea of what is supreme in life starts to also change depending on which is the layer that you're dealing with. And actually, we can say that, and this is another verse of another Upanishad, that is also describing basically this fundamental thing that what is supreme, what we understand as supreme, is what is satisfying the needs of the individual. And in this case, you can also say that is a definition of God if you want. That is, the definition of God is what comes to be satisfying the needs of the others, of the other entities. So in this case, that's a fundamental understanding that you have in the Upanishads, you can say. This idea you have different beings, conscious beings, and they're interacting with each other, but also there is a source of these conscious beings. That is, in a way, that's the one who is maintaining all the other beings. And in a way, we have a glimpse of that wholeness, of that higher supreme thing when we deal with things. And we, in this case, it says that these wise souls worship him in his abode, trying to attain everlasting peace. So worshiping that fundamental principle that, as we were saying, like worshiping in this case, you can take as acting and using your time for that. And even on a basic elemental level, you use your time in a way, you're worshiping food or money, trying to get those things. Eventually, in this case, what the Upanishads are presenting is that actually you are doing the same thing. You're using your time, you're using your actions, you're using your behavior. That was the thing that we were trying to characterize at the beginning. But in this case, is the action, in a way, that is still there. Those actions won't disappear, but they are acting, having those bigger, broader goals and broader ideals in mind. And eventually, that's what's the point here, that eventually that's the final objective, to be achieve that ananda or achieve the peace that comes to finally feeling that those multifarious and unlimited things that are, or needs that are arising eventually can be satisfied, considering that final shelter. And that's basically the final objective of this whole process. So in a way, we are, you can get that idea from what is presented in these different texts, selected text from the Upanishads, we can say. So yeah, so basically the whole idea of yoga is trying to rise up and trying to continue, we can say, identifying which are those needs that are more sustainable in the end. Because as we realize that now, as we were talking, we started talking about the uncertain things, and in a way, uncertainty is something that you can avoid. Once you act and operate upon this, we can say, material level, that uncertainty is something that comes with the package. You cannot escape from that. But in this case, what is proposed here, that from that inner search, you will try to find something that remains. So around all those things that are uncertain, all the things that shift and are created and destroyed, the idea is that you're trying to look for something that it remains and something that is maintained. And in that thing, eventually you are locating the consciousness, trying to find that peace. Okay, so I think I have talked a lot, so I think that this is a good final point to try to open the discussion. So hopefully this was helpful and some ideas started to appear around. So thank you very much. I'm going to stop sharing right now so I can see you better.
Thank you very much, Pradyumna.
That's great.
I hope everyone could join and just thank Pradyumna for his illuminating investigation into needs as understood, not just now in modern times, but also the wealth of information and insight that we have from the Vedic tradition. So I will invite anyone who has a question to unmute and ask one. But in the meantime, while we wait for people to gather their questions, I might ask one to kick off. Pradyumna, what are your thoughts about prioritizing certain needs? What I mean is, part of me wonders whether, so I'm kind of like torn in two directions. In one direction, it seems that it might be advisable to cover your basic needs first, so the lower ones you talked about, because they sustain you, put you in a position for you to rise to the higher needs. So me in my life, I would do well to dedicate my time in such a way that I'm prioritizing the basic needs so that I can hope to have a capacity or opportunity to touch some of these higher needs that we talked about. That's one direction. But in another direction, I sometimes wonder, maybe the lower needs can be, maybe I should prioritize in the other way. So prioritize the higher needs. But then you wonder, is that a risky business? Because if you neglect the other needs for the sake of prioritizing some higher level need, then you might injure yourself or you might risk something about your progress. Do you have any thoughts about how we might balance these different levels of needs, and how we should prioritize them in particular?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Yeah, I don't know if I'm misquoting, maybe. So if I make a mistake, please let me know. But I think that that's precisely one of the questions that Arjuna is making to Krishna in the Bhagavad-gita, because he's asking Krishna that, okay, you are proposing this whole yogic path, and all you have to do all these things to fulfill that, achieve that spiritual advancement. But Arjuna is saying that that's okay. That's also very difficult. So if I undertake that endeavor, it well may be that I won't obtain the final goal of that. So he's saying, but I also neglected the other needs. I also neglected the other needs. So what's going to happen? Because basically it will appear that like that person is losing both ways, because it will lose the spiritual endeavor if it's not able to fulfill the path, and also losing the material enjoyment because yeah. That's one of the questions that Arjuna is making in the Bhagavad-gita. So yeah, and that looks like it's a quite natural question in a way if you want to try to balance these two things. So from that perspective, yeah, one of the important things that appear in this case, and I would say mostly from Maslow's perspective, is that one of the things, well, and there's so many other things I can say why it's leading and taking that view, but that's the thing that is an individual, and eventually you can characterize an individual. So it's not a one size fits all. So in a way, that's the recommendation that is appearing that like every different people will have a different situation, and depending on that situation, those needs will emerge in a particular way. So because in a way is, yeah, like if you have to eat, even if you try to repress, do that action of trying to repress that for some other, the things are going to arise and you will have to eat one way or another. And that's one of the other things that also Krishna says, and when he speaks about this idea of the balance, that eventually everybody will follow their nature, and we can say in a way that what he refers by nature is can be intimately linked to what we are understanding here by goals, which are the goals. And when Krishna is describing the different types of people, in a way, we can say that he's describing depending on what's the type of goals, what are the kind of things that they expect to achieve. So if one thing we can say that is presented in Bhagavad Gita is that every single person has to take realize in a way which is their position. So that's one initial thing. Acknowledge, okay, this is my nature, this is my situation, this is my position, these are my needs, these are the things. That's one thing. But the other thing that the Bhagavad Gita also does is that it's saying, okay, but independent of the situation that you are, there is something that you can do. And there is a whole, I can't remember, sorry, exactly which chapter, but you have this part, the final part of a chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, basically Krishna is saying, okay, the best thing is that you do this. But if you don't do, you can't do that, do this other thing. If you can do that, do this other thing, and so on. Basically, he's elaborating that. I think there's different.
12th chapter.
Thank you, 12th chapter. So you have that ladder of yoga, I think that also is called sometimes. That's the idea that everybody can do something based on what's their situation. So if it's something more like a black and white, in a way, as we may try to make it look, yeah, that type of description that Krishna is making is pointless. But it's actually, he's pointing that there is that graduality, let's say, in this process. So from that perspective, yeah, I would say that you have to account first where you're standing, and from there, obviously, you will have a final objective, but you have to do what you think with the things that you have. No, do what you can with the things that you have. That's it. But from the other perspective, as also from another thing that we can also add over what we said, is that in this case, it's already quite meaningful, I think, the fact that you realize that, okay, I want to make a spiritual progress, for example, as you were proposing in your question. Even if you realize that that's, you cannot take it fully, because also, again, that comes with the, we can say, prejudice or ideas of what it means to make a spiritual advancement. Because from that perspective, you may read that you have the idea that making a spiritual advancement means just leaving everything and being a sadhu or something like that. And sadhu in the more stereotypical way that you may think. But in this case, we also know that in Bhagavad Gita is proposed, is presented that that's not necessarily what means by a spiritual advancement. So the whole elaboration that Krishna makes of what it actually means, renunciation, I think is in line with that, like is overcoming that stereotypical way of what it means spiritual, we can say. But from that the idea, and that's, I think that is very important, from the fact that you are, even if you realize that you cannot fully undertake that endeavor, let's say, spiritual endeavor. Still, you have that goal in mind, and you will organize or try to operate in a way that you will organize your activities, even if it's not in an immediate future, to a certain degree, at least in a faraway future, but trying to move in that direction. That is completely different to someone who will organize their entire life completely based on that, we can say, primary level. Because if you organized your entire life thinking that the highest supreme thing is to get money, definitely is going to be different from someone who realizes, okay, I live in this world, I need to get money, but I actually realize, understand, or at least have a glimpse that, okay, but there's some other things that maybe are more important to, and that are worthy to be explored and developed. So I think that even in that position, the fact that even if you see it as something like so distant, it still makes a difference in the way that you, and in the way, in the thing in this case is, as we were talking about worship, we can understand worship in a more general way as the way that you are acting and the way that you are using your time. So in a way, it makes a difference. And the fact that you are at least trying, even if you see that something's too so far away, but at least you're trying to organize your time, your actions, trying to at least get you closer to that target, that objective. So yeah, does it make sense?
Thank you very much, Pradyumna. That was very helpful. I have many other questions, but I'm going to park them to give others a chance. I see Rupa Vilas Prabhu's hand go up.
This is just a question about, I've heard Prabhupada speak about Anamoya and then the next stage, Pranamoya. In this way, he says the child's whole focus is food. And then at a certain stage, he notices that other people exist and he offers them some of it.
Mm-hmm.
So and there's that being the next stage. But what, I'm not so clear at Jnanamaya, exactly what is being described at that level.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't so clear to me in the presentation. What constitutes Jnanamaya?
Yeah. Or Manomaya, also the thing is, yeah.
Well, Manomaya, I understand. Okay.
Yeah, because I think, yeah, because you have Jnana, Jnanamaya, and Big Jnanamaya. So Manomaya, I'm taking as synonyms in this case, given the presentation. I'm taking as synonyms Jnanamaya and Manomaya, that is basically operating at this mental level. So what I understood from it is this, basically I'm taking which are the basic functions as it's described in let's say the Vedic tradition, which are the functions of the mind. And the functions of the mind are the thinking, the feeling, the desiring, but in a way it's a less immediate sense than the purely satisfaction of the senses, let's say. You realize that we can say in an almost automatic way, the senses will look for being satisfied. So the mouth will like to have sweet things, tasty things, and so on. So you can say that that's a more, in a perspective, it's more immediate, like you have the sense, you want satisfaction, and that's it, almost automatic without any elaborations in between. But Manomaya in this case, I understand it, is that extra layer in which you start to realize, okay, I can think this, and I can start to make those satisfactions more elaborate. So in a way, yeah, it's real. You're operating in a way to try to satisfy maybe those same needs, but you start to create different ways of satisfying those same needs. So you're not just going to the forest and getting some strawberries, but actually you are building up a big industrial complex in a way that you have the machine that is going to do that. And anyway, you elaborate things using all of these capacities that you have to understand at the mental level, you can say, all these different relationships that you have in the world. That is a bit more sophisticated, than the purely immediate gratifications, we can say. So it's an extra level of sophistication. But at this moment, at this point, is still you can say that it's still operating upon those same principles. That is, to be satisfying those same needs. It is these physiological needs, it is safety needs, but also I think I've read it in maybe in some other comments from Prabhupada. There is this idea that you start to realize that the mind comes to be some other extension of the body in a way. So the whole mind, you start to all these more subtle things that are not directly there, like things that you can perceive. But for example, I would understand that all the more subtle structures in the world, like for example, social structures, because you can say that like the manager by default is or the leader or it's not by default a position that is constructed because you have, I don't know, longer legs or something that is directly physical, but actually something that is created upon this mental elaboration. Because everybody agrees that, I don't know, this guy has a lot of money, then he has a higher position. But you can say that the money actually is just something that is in the mind. We can say that is like an agreement that is start to arise from all the elaborations, further more subtle elaborations that these people, the things that we start to create through all these extra layers of analysis, we can say. Does it make sense?
Yeah, good answer. This is a little bit in-house, but I just wanted to briefly read something from
Sure.
Ishopanishad. I know that it sort of breaks the ceiling or the window of remaining non-esoteric, but this is from Bhaktivedanta. He says social status, mental development, cleanliness, austerity, nourishment, and the struggle for existence are all for the maintenance of the body. The self-realization part of one's activities is executed in one's occupation as a devotee of the Lord, and one performs actions in that connection also. One must perform these two different functions along parallel lines because a conditioned soul cannot give up the maintenance of his body. I'm sort of relating it to some comments earlier. The proportion of activities for maintenance of the body decreases, however, in proportion to the increase in devotional service. As long as the proportion of devotional service has not come to the right point, there is a chance for an occasional exhibition of worldliness. But it should be noted that such worldliness cannot continue for long, because by the grace of the Lord, such imperfections will come to an end very shortly. So in other words, it's very simple statements by Bhaktivedanta, where he's just saying that they have to operate on a parallel line, but the idea is that one should start to gain an ascendancy over time. As you get closer, as you develop, your Krishna consciousness, then the level of attachment or the level of absorption in devotional activity would increase, and the other would decrease. The physical or the physical needs become less and less important. And we can see the great sadhus in the past, they've learned to minimize their physical necessities as far as possible so they can have more time for the other. Okay, that's it.
Precisely. Thank you very much.
Can I ask, just on this Manamoya, Pranamoya level, any chance you can bring that back? Because the way Prabhupada, that purport that he talks about it, because there is something that I noted.
Yeah, taking it back.
Something that I'm not completely clear.
Sure. Give me 1 second. I think it was this one.
Yeah. Is it? Yeah, like here it is stated there is a manifestation of the Supreme Lord's energy. He calls this a manifestation of the Supreme Lord's energy. And then he says the first one is a materialistic realization of the Supreme. What I'm trying to understand, the way it is phrased, there are different realizations of the Supreme.
Yes.
So is it correct? Is my understanding correct that for all this 5 category of people, you can say, that have this type of consciousness, for them that what God is?
Yeah.
So these people are God conscious. Is maybe now I understand my what I'm trying to clear. For, do they this even the person on the Annamoya or let's say Pranamoya, for they see through food or through life or through knowledge the whole God? I'm not sure I make myself clear. They have in one sense, they have a full vision. Is the full God, the omnipotent, great God, the absolute truth? The way I perceive is through food or through life maintenance or whatever you want to define that. But my point is this: these people are okay. I'm connecting to your point that you need to know where you are and what your level, and then you link into that thing. So, in one sense, whatever they are, they're fine, because through just simply, even if it's just simply through food, these people have a full realization of God.
Yeah.
And it's good enough for them.
Yeah. I don't know that I agree with. I understood it in that way. That in a way.
You understood it that way, okay.
The position of God, because like we have some other understanding, but in this case, if we define God as the supreme principle that we follow and we use our time and life to try to achieve. Yeah, that's the supreme thing for us in our life, and we operate upon those principles. Yeah, we can say that that's God, and that's how I understood in this case that those people from their perspective, yeah, that's the supreme thing. That's the highest thing that you can get, is a lot of food or money or whatever. So I understood as you did. But in this case, yeah, it could be the question, like, what's the motivation to try to move from one position to the other? Because if we see it like that, yeah, like the people who is thinking that the food is the supreme, why is that position worse than the other position?
Is the question is then the question is there a need, talking about going back to the issue of need, is there a need for these people to be up to, do they have to have the need of the pressure even to be upperly mobile?
Yeah. And I think that in that sense, just to cover the other part of the question, that is that when Krishna says, that everybody's following the path one way or another. Someone's in a direct way, someone's in an indirect way. I think that it falls that in a way that verse is describing this same thing that we're observing here. So in the end, everybody one way or another is dealing with the supreme, only from a different perspective. But what you're mentioning is that which will be the desire, or which will be the motivation or the advantage for someone to move from one perspective to the other, from one type of consciousness to the other. We could say that, on one hand, people have to try to account for the position that they are. So that's, a fake transition, let's say, wouldn't be advantageous. And actually, I think that that's why it's so deep, because in a way, the person, when, let's say, is making that transition, you actually are having a realization yourself. You're realizing why one and the other level is, let's say, better than the other. What I'm gaining if I'm operating at my mental level versus I'm just trying to get food in, that's it. What do I win with that? We can ask that, because if everything is in a balance, let's say, why should disrupt it?
Exactly.
But in this case, the point that I will raise in that related to that would be that, again, if the idea is to find a sustainable way of living at the level that you're operating at the level of just getting the food, the kind of interactions that you have over there are going to be, by definition, because that's the nature of the world, are going to be uncertain. Because if there's something sure about the way the world works, is that it's going to change. So in this case, food is intimately linked to that manifestation, a material manifestation, we can say. And naturally, we're going to be in the waves. going to be good. Yeah, sometimes you're going to feel that we are completely close with the supreme from the perspective of food. But if that's the game that I want to play, you also have to accept that in some moments you won't. And you have to accept that in some moments you will suffer because you are basing that in the platform of the things that change. So the idea, for example, we take just the step from Annamaya to Manomaya. As we were talking about, in a way, I don't know if we can strictly put it that way, but let's say Manomaya can be the rational perspective. So you are a more further sophisticated understanding, and you are a bit more rational about how you deal with the world. So because you're more rational, and that's some of the discussion we had before, what's the advantage of being rational? Well, one of the advantages and benefits of being rational is that you will be less affected by all these shifts and all these transitions and all these waves. You won't be like completely swayed by this, but actually to be able to hold yourself a bit stronger. You have maybe not the stronger anchor, but you will have an anchor that will allow you to understand. And in a way, again, the whole idea of science, in a way, is operating at that level. And it's more beneficial because you can see that a pandemic comes and yeah, you're affected, but you are not completely decimated. So in a way, it gives you a safer position to try to, again, find that satisfaction. So I would say that initially, maybe there is more points, but I would say that that's a quite strong position to try to justify why a movement, let's say, or trying to educate yourself, to try to get in a higher position is beneficial.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pradyumna. Do you want to stop the share so I could just see?
Yeah, I will stop.
Any other questions? Rupa Vilas-Rupa?
Yeah, I was just thinking that those different, the different levels that you're citing from Prabhupada's writings. What is it? I think, and I may not have understood everything you just said, but it seems that we're impelled due to our previous lives and so forth, and previous experiences, previous lives and activities. We are impelled to come to a certain level, and that level where we actually feel safe, whether it's physically or mentally or whatever, we tend to stay there. So, but there's still an impelling force. It's just a question of how long it will take to be operable, in the sense that, we're being impelled by the Supersoul, by Paramatma, to come to a higher level, to progress. I was just thinking, like in Bhagavad-gita, for instance, we have this character who's being impelled to higher and higher spiritual levels, but materially also, I think we're impelled, by the Lord, by the Paramatma to come to the next level. And as you were talking about, when you're going through that transition, there's a certain amount of fear or uncertainty, and so you feel like you're gambling or taking a chance, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
And so that may be the obstacle in a way for some people. I mean, some people are just going to stay right, like say at Manomaya. They're going to just remain there. They're happy there. They feel safe there. They feel comfortable there. And they've figured out a way to explain anything else that comes along on that platform.
Yeah.
But in other words, even in presenting Krishna consciousness, if the person's not actually seeking something more than what he's already achieved, what can you do? There's nothing that can be done. You're looking for the seekers. It seems to me that you're searching for those persons and hopefully trying to find them, because that impelling thing may be there, but some people are going to resist it and stay where they are, unless they can be convinced to take that leap, to take that risk.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, actually, because just taking Maslow's perspective, I come from the American tradition. So he was, in a way, with his system, also trying to, in a way, build a way to, I would say, empowering different things that for him were very important. For example, different levels of free society, freedom of speech, and then he was saying that all those things were required in a way that all individuals that will have all the different manifestations will be able to eventually grow up upon those different levels, but without any coercion to do it. Because for him, in the end, I think that also is something that you can extract from the Vedic perspective. That in the end is an individual path, and any coercion in the end is not going to be very successful. So basically the whole process of in this case, education, as Yagapana knows very well, comes to be the thing that the education comes as something that you're trying to take something from the inside of the person and not just trying to impose something from the outside. And education in the deepest sense comes to refer to that. So yeah, absolutely. From that perspective, yeah, like it's natural that some people won't try to make that jump. But that's the thing that also we can try to understand which are the things that make the people to have that jump, or to try to give that a step, given or risk everything. I think that's one of the things that fascinates me the most. Like why people is willing to sacrifice so much for something that for any other people may look like meaningless. And also, so is I don't know. I also find it fascinating how things can completely shift their importance and the purpose or the meaning for someone once they are able to look at things from another perspective. So yeah, that's yeah, definitely, like as we were saying, like these unstable moments are usually the crisis when people start to rethink themselves and rethink what's really important. So again, in this case, like every individual in a way arrives to a moment of, let's say, personal crisis that makes you reflect upon those things, or realize that you cannot just keep living in the same way and you have to look for something else. So I think that that's in a way unavoidable. Thank you.
If I can just address this point that Ravilas Prabhu brought up, the way I was looking at it, Ravilas Prabhu, is that's why I asked Pradyumna if there is where there is a need in the first place to rise up, because if the situation is that, let's say, by nature, by your the way you are after food and what is you let's say you are on the Annamoy platform. So, and as it was phrased there in that verse from the Taittiriya Upanishad, they said the realization of God through food. That's what attracted my attention. So would it be just enough that you are after food in, even you can say Annamoy food in a more like an extensive way, you know, sustenance like that. That's what you're about. That's your main concern. And you learn, and you find out, you learn, that's what it seems to be the way it's phrased in this Taittiriya Upanishad verse, that that is coming from God. Food and maintain all that, or the Annamoy comes from God. So you really stabilize yourself in truth, in the truth of the matter, that your sustenance comes from God, and you live your life that way because that's good enough for you. You don't have higher need. You don't have a need to to build factories or to take over countries or to become a Sanskrit scholar. You're happy, like, yeah, that's you're good. I'm sustained. I'm eating well, and this and that. And I just consolidate that, understand more and more, and realize how this sustenance is coming from God. And by that understanding, you develop affection for God. You develop love for God. Is that what this is about? That's my question. So wherever you are, wherever you identify where you're at, what are your needs, which, as Pradyumna correctly pointed out, they're different from each individual. And understanding that your needs are fulfilled, even taken for the needs point, are fulfilled by God. And then you live, you cultivate that thing, and therefore there is no need to raise above, because you can achieve everything just by that. Even in the lowest stage, you can develop, affection for God just through that one aspect of God, as the, they have this Pushti Marga in India, which means exactly that, that God is a sustainer. Pushti means sustainer, that we are sustained by God. It seems to be that, there's no need to push them, to unsettle them even, to try to, because you can get everything just there.
Yeah. I will add to that. Yeah, I think that there's a point over that for sure. But at least as I understood it, in a way, is that what you're referring to, in a way, is a bit more sophisticated than pure animal, because in a way you are connecting that to God or something higher. But in this case, as I understood it from the pure perspective, let's say animal, will be that food itself is the whole in whole, the all in all. Because as you're describing, I will agree that someone just want to just keep in balance with the rest of the universe using that particular manifestation, because that's another thing that, and it's true, that you can see the fundamental supreme principle in everything. And that's another way of looking at it. But in a way, I would say, I don't know if it's the best way of describing it, it's like you went up and later you're going down, let's say. I don't know if you get the image.
I raised that because that's how it seems to be phrased. It says realization of the supreme. That's why I raised it.
Yeah.
Because that's how it seems to be presented.
Yeah, but from that perspective, that's the thing. I think that this is from the perspective of the individual person that sees that as the bigger thing that he or she can think of. So from that perspective, the biggest thing is observed. But in that case, I will say that from that perspective, which is again the motivation to share. Because as you were describing this idea that I will get my food and that's it, and I will be in peace with the rest of the world. Well, I will say this is the food, this is the supreme element. I want to get all the supreme element because I want to be completely satisfied in that element. And I want to start to think under that same principle, the supreme principle, that I want to start to take all the food in the world and I don't want to share. So the fact that you're saying that, I agree with you that someone is living in peace, let's say, and they having her part, her quota, and understanding that everything, this food is a manifestation. We can say that we do that with the prasadam. And you're offering the prasadam, in a way you're doing precisely that. Yeah. But in a way it's because you're understanding there is something higher than just the food. And you're acknowledging that this little part, let's say, this part that is the food, is also part of that whole. And you are thankful, are in peace with that thing that you have. That I think that will be a bit different from the perspective that the whole in whole is just the food. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, we're coming up on 8:30 soon, but I think I see Rupa Vilas Prabhu's hand up.
I don't know, maybe I'm just not understanding, but I have a completely different idea about this, because in this sense, I mean, when we talk about Anamoya, most people that are at that stage, they know nothing about the Supreme. They may be worshiping the Supreme. There's no doubt that ultimately everything's coming from God, but they don't necessarily know that everything's coming from God. So when you're at the Anamoya stage, you just want to eat and you want to be sustained by that eating. And it's the most important thing in the world to you is to eat. And then at the Pranamoya stage, you start to notice that there's other beings around you and that, that you're going to have some interaction with those beings, but you still may not have any idea that everything's coming from God. I'm just saying that I don't think it's an automatic that the person who's at the stage of Anamoya has any idea at all that he's connected to God, or that God's the source of all these things. That comes at a higher level. At the level of Gyan, maybe you start to recognize that there's a divinity, and then at Vigyan, you're come up a little bit higher stage, and then ultimately it's just that God consciousness doesn't really begin at those lower stages. I mean, someone may connected to God if they're very fortunate, but I think it's not an automatic at all.
I think that in this case, when it's referring to supreme, it's referring to the highest thing that that person can think of. So the highest thing that someone in that platform can think of is food. And in the end, basically, as we were talking, like the circle of things that you can think of is increasing while you are increasing in those levels. So in this case, as you were saying, like, yeah, like you don't have idea that there is a supreme God that is connecting everything and everyone in the universe. No, because that you're not thinking, or your idea of supreme is not at that, it's not covering that wide, let's say. So from that perspective, I think that as understood, supreme in this case is referring to supreme as what the individual, that individual accounts for or acknowledge for what is the supreme or the biggest thing that they can think of.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Maybe I'll take one last comment. I saw CJ put his hand up, but I just wanted to flag. He also put a comment in the chat with a link to an article that was relevant to the talk. So if anyone wants to pick that up before the Zoom call closes, please click on that. CJ, did you want to say something? You had your hand up earlier.
Yeah, thank you, Pradyumna Prabhu. Good to see everyone. Well, I just, when I wrote the article many years ago, it was in reference to leadership, and the ability to lead is based on how free they are from insecurities. And so, considering that we've joined an alternate society and somewhat cut ourselves off from the normal kind of scheme of networking, we've made ourselves at this stage more insecure than ever. And that's what I've seen, but I was just presenting that in terms of how leadership will operate if they have those insecurities. So, but Rupa was saying, I believe correctly, just in a simplistic way, that Anamoya is just referring to amoebas, really, microbes that just, just live to eat. And Pranamoya is where they know that they still have that now need to eat, which is not normal for any organism, but also that they have a need, they have this consciousness to defend that food as well. And then Brahmamoya, or Jnanamoya, Brahmamoya, is that level of inquiry about God, but it doesn't mean that they know who Krishna is. They're just in a curious state, whether they be measuring the universe or down the bottom of a well like a frog, trying to figure it out, measuring it all out. But then, of course, Krishnamoya. So I too made the connection between that and Maslow's triangle. Thank you for your presentation today, Pradyumna Prabhu.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Great. All right, I think we've just gone past 8:30, testament to how interesting Pradyumna's talk was. So thank you again, Pradyumna, for taking the time to research all of that and present it in that way. And thanks to everyone.
I like the person in the shell, by the way. That was my favorite. The person in the eggshell. That's what did it for me. Thanks.
Nicely done.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thanks everyone for coming as well and
Very stimulating.
participating.